All right, this is the follow-up, and we are following up today on a live video I did on Georgia Space Chat in 2020 entitled Subbing. And my guest today on the follow-up is none other but the great Paul Adamy. Paul, thank you so much for making yourself available, and welcome to the follow-up.
Great. Thanks, George. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. So, without any further ado, let's get right into it. For those watching, for those listening, let me give you a little bit of a background. Paul Adamy was the bass player on the Broadway production of the hit show Mamma Mia. And as such, that's how I met him, right? I ended up subbing at Mamma Mia for at least a year or a year and a half or something like that. I believe I was between shows between Spring Awakening and Memphis. And Paul was nice enough to, when I contacted him, to tell me, listen, come in. You know, first time I contacted him, he already had enough subs, but then after a couple years, his subbing list or his list of subs opened up and there was a spot and I took it, right? Now, the reason why I thought Paul would be a great guest on the follow-up today, because so far I have gone on record and spoken about subbing and subbing on Mamma Mia, which for me was the hardest show that I ever had to learn. I started off very strong, and the next, after my first show, the next 4 or 5 shows just plummeted in nerves taken over, no real train wrecks, but just terrible performances. And I thought it would be interesting to have Paul here today because he was on the other side of that situation. And he can perhaps shed some light on how that presented itself to him and you know, what were the measures that were being taken. So Paul, let me open it up to you. Take us back to, I forgot what year it was.
We opened 20 years ago now, this September.
Crazy. Okay.
Right after 9/11, that we started rehearsals. And we opened October 18th, 2001.
Wow, incredible.
And so it'll be 20 years this fall.
Incredible. Well, I mean, and also just for the audience, so the audience knows, 20 years, 15 out of which, or 14 out of which, you ended up playing the show.
Right. I did all 14 years.
Incredible. Incredible. Yep. Incredible. So, yeah, I mean, that's an unheard of run in reality. That doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
So the year that I started at the show must have been anywhere between 2009 and, no, that's not right.
No, it was earlier than that.
Really?
Well, I think so. Was David Holsenberg the conductor then, or Wendy Cavett?
Wendy Cavett.
Oh, it was Wendy. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was she took over at year 5. So she took over around 2006. So right after that.
Okay. So I think, well, I started with Spring Awakening in 2006, and that went for almost 3 years. So it must have been 2009, right?
Wow. I didn't think it was that late.
Yeah. So 2009, 2010, right there in that time period is when I first played the show, right? So why don't you take it over? I just played my first show. What were the comments that came to you?
Well, you were always highly regarded, and I got a positive report after I played the show, and everybody knew it was a hot chair in the pit. Probably out of all the players, it was the most exposed, and there were only 9 of us there, 4 keyboard players, 2 guitars, bass, drums, and percussion. And between the fretless playing and the 5-string, it was a really exposed pressure book, and a lot of guys left on their own. Some people got shows like you did, but there was definitely a positive report after you played, and everybody loved you. You were highly regarded, and I'm not just saying this now, years later, but you really were, and that's why you went on to do so many shows of your own, and you never came back.
I totally appreciate that. Nevertheless, I mean, yes, after the first show, I'm sure that people, you know, said good things about me. I killed that first show. I remember that. Like, I remember that feeling, right? Second show, different story. So
Very really common. I know as a sub too, I probably played 4 or 5 shows before I got the chair at Mamma Mia.
wow.
And you know, you put in all that time and you're really focused. And the first show, most of the time goes really well because of all the time you put in. But then you come back and you relax a little bit, at least for
Mm,
me, and you think, oh, I got this.
mm,
And then you kind of lose a little bit of that edge, a little bit of that focus, you know, sitting on the edge of your chair and staying on top of things. And
right.
as soon as you do that, at least for me, you can make those little mistakes that um, really kind of haunt you a little bit, and you think, what the hell happened? You
Exactly. No, I mean that's. Sorry, say that again.
slump, they call it.
Yeah. Second show slump. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, I know that there were no with my second show there were no um, train wrecks,
Yep.
right? That didn't happen, and that didn't happen throughout. I mean, there was maybe one show where I came in with one note, in the wrong place or something like that. That I do remember.
Right.
But it was nerves taking over, and I'm not a nervous guy. Like, I don't necessarily start sweating or get a dry mouth or whatever. But what happened was that these little insecurities or these little moments that challenge you
Yep.
grind away at your focus.
Yeah, and your confidence. You make one, maybe it's a rhythmic error that nobody's going to hear.
Right.
You know, a note, especially if you're a half step off, is really going to be noticeable. But a rhythmic error is not as noticeable unless you're in the rhythm section. But you know, we had a great drummer, Ray Marchica, and Jeff
Right.
Campbell, really great guitar player, rhythm guitar player.
Right.
Locking in with those guys was the key for me. But you're right. You get off the track just a little bit, and it
Right.
can kind of haunt you a little bit for the rest of the show. It's
Yeah.
kind of like what they say about bad reviews versus good reviews, right?
Right.
You kind of let those continue to bother you along the way. At least for me. I'm not speaking for everybody, but
Yeah, no, I get it. That's of course, everybody's different. Everybody processes, situations like that differently. It's also, so let's just follow that train of thought. All of these little moments kind of grind away at your focus, right? So with every little mistake or perceived mistake, because it might be something, where you think you're wrong,
right,
and in reality you're not that far off,
right, right.
But it all grinds away at your focus, at your confidence, as you said, and you end up being nervous, right? So then, third show. Okay, so this was the second show. Third show. What was the feedback you got then? Because by that point, I know now I'm sitting there and I'm sweating bullets. Okay. I mean, I'm a mess. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the feedback that you got then?
You know, over the 14-year run, I must have got like 100 calls for people to sub for me
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and probably had 20 to 30 subs altogether. Along out of those 100 that contacted me, I couldn't say yes to everybody. I didn't think it was fair to the people who had learned the book, put in the time,
Mm,
and if they played it less than once a month, I really felt bad. It was a hard book to keep under your fingers, and so
right.
um, there were a lot of subs to keep track of. All I know is, and what I remember is that you were really highly regarded, and that people loved having you in the pit, and you were definitely one of the top subs that I had. Um,
Wow.
really, because I don't think. Well, what am I trying to say? I think um, it,
Memory plays a trick on us.
yeah,
That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it does. And like I said, the specific comments that I got after your third show, I don't think I would be able to remember that. All I know is that they did let some subs go. Some people left on their own because they couldn't, they didn't like the pressure and so the fact that you stayed, you know, that was a good sign. I mean, Wendy and David Holstenberg, the first conductor before her, always gave really specific notes to all the subs.
Yeah.
And she probably talked to you a little bit too.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, she definitely, Wendy was incredibly supportive. And I really, really appreciated that because by the time the third time, fourth show came around, like it took me a solid 5 shows to turn this situation around, you know. So by the time show 3, 4, and 5 are happening, Wendy now is I don't want to say on high alert, but she's aware that I'm having a hard time and I'm struggling, right?
Did she to that effect?
Yeah, no, she took me aside and said, listen, you're doing okay. You know, certain things you need to take a look at. And I appreciated all of that feedback because at this point I am now a nervous mess. I'm a wreck, okay? I don't even know where to start because I feel like I'm just fucking up all over the place, right? And she was very detail oriented, and that kind of.
She had good ears, and she always made really good comments.
Yeah. It's that totally. Sorry, say that again.
I want to help everybody. She did want everybody to play their best show and get better each time.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. So her focus on detail kind of pulled me out of whatever headspace I went into, right? So then, I mean, memory is also, as I said, memory is a tricky thing because I felt terrible. Right? I know I felt terrible, and you know, for you to say now, and this is the first time I'm hearing this, that I was highly regarded and all of that, I felt absolutely like I was the lowest of the low.
That's what I was saying. I think, you know, you can do one little thing that you know you could have played better, but it can largely go unnoticed.
Yeah.
You know, everybody back then, like all the pits today, but even 20 years ago, we all had our own mixers.
Yeah.
We all could dial in what we wanted to hear, which was great. It was way before Aviom, but we had a 16-channel board, and everybody was there to mix in what you wanted to hear. So who knows how loud the bass was in some of the other people's channels. And I always felt that was the trickiest thing. And without the digital Aviom boards that we have now, you know, you weren't able to save a mix. So I used to make little marks.
Yeah.
Board, you know, there was a little knob. It wasn't even a fader, a slider. It was a knob. So I would make marks there where I wanted to hear it. And obviously I'd encourage my subs to come in and get the mix that they want to hear. But when you're busy just trying to play the show, you can't do that the first few shows.
Yeah, for sure.
You just have to go with the mix you're given, and maybe you can make a little change along the way. But when you get to dial in a really good mix, like I would focus in on Jeff and Ray the most, and then of course Wendy, and that would make a big difference.
Yeah.
I do a click too, obviously. So
right.
I always felt the balance between the click and the drummer was really important too.
Yeah, no doubt. That's. Sorry, say that again.
Maybe that was something that, you know, wasn't quite right for you, and you might have wanted to hear things differently, but
that's an interesting. I mean, here's the thing. Like for as long as I can remember, I mean, when I first started playing piano, I didn't like a kick. That was when I was like 6 years old. Ever since then, I don't mind the kick. Like once I got it, I was like, okay, I actually I can relinquish some of this responsibility because the click is going to keep me steady, you know, and all I need to do is play with it. So the click never really bothered me that much. I don't remember.
And the kick was big in that show.
Yeah, for sure.
Pop disco, really.
That's we're gonna get to that in just a second, because that I think is where a lot of the difficulty lies, right? But coming back to the click never really bothered me. I had like all this training in classical music where there is absolutely no kick, you know, and you just follow along, you hear, and you're part of the orchestral sound. And then on the other side of that spectrum, I had, you know, an understanding with the kick that I really didn't mind it, right? And on top of that, with your show with Mamma Mia, the kick kind of seamlessly went into what the drums were doing anyway. So it was,
Hopefully.
yeah. Most of the time, though. No, I mean, seriously, it was.
Drum subs and
Yeah, no, it got to the place where it was indistinguishable, right?
good. Good.
And that's really where you want to be.
That's really where you want to be. It's true.
Right, right.
And between that and the kick drum,
Yeah.
and the kick drum, yeah,
Yeah.
you try to lock into that. And Ray and I basically tried to play right on the click. We weren't behind it. It wasn't that kind of gig.
Yeah.
It wasn't a rushed feeling kind of fusion gig, obviously. So we just tried to stay right on the click and bury it.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, and totally succeeded in doing that. That's for sure. There was so fine. There's I'll take the compliment that everybody was happy to see me.
You wouldn't have been there. You wouldn't have lasted if.
That's true. That's true.
You got to just take it at that and know that I pretty much all the subs would have good shows and bad shows.
Yeah.
No train wrecks, but just little things that
Right.
could bother the player. And even I would, after 8,000 shows or whatever we played, you know, they all weren't 100% there. You know, people have different shows all the time. So, you know, if something happened, you know, you'd go home and it would bother you, but then you'd get another chance and
yeah, for sure,
to do it again.
Yeah, that meant the world to me. And also, you know, then I ended up subbing on the tour. So right there, you know, you had exposure to the material, you know, 8 shows a week.
Yeah. How long did you do the tour?
I remember being there for 2 weeks, perhaps. It was a sit down in Florida, and I was subbing for Paul. I forgot his last name. Passmore, I believe.
I don't know him.
Yeah. Anyway, I since my 5th show on the Broadway production was, in my estimation, terrible. I ended up, you know, calling around and calling like Frank Canino, because he was subbing for you as well at the time, right?
Yep.
And
subs.
Say again.
Frank was one of my first subs because he got me into Smokey Joe's Cafe, and so between him and Vince Fay, who got me in at Footloose,
right,
and Conrad Korsh, those are 3 of my first subs.
Right. So I ended up talking with Frank because he was subbing for me at Spring Awakening, right? And he explained to me, he kind of broke down the whole learning a show situation in a completely different way than what I had been doing before, right? And with him, the way he explained it, and this is where I'm trying to get to with the pop and disco thing. With Mamma Mia, you had this mountain of material, right? And you know, there was no other way but to go up the mountain and then down the other side. You couldn't go around it. You couldn't go through it. There was no tunnel. There was no shortcut. Nothing, right?
No shortcut.
Yeah. and the thing that he explained to me is that you have to kind of keep in mind that you're only playing one song at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take it even a step further, you're only playing one note at a time. All right. So all of your preparation, when you're preparing for the show, for this particular one, prepare one song, get that down, then move on.
Right.
You know, by the time you've played the first song 3 times, let me go this way. By the time you've played the second song 3 times, you will have already played the first song 3 times as well. You will have played both songs 6 times now, right? You keep moving that way. So at the end of that process, play through every song 3 times, try to get it perfect, no mistakes, no nothing, right? It's as if you have played the entire show 3 times, as opposed to
Right.
playing through the show one after the other.
Right.
Right? It was one song after the other, making a mistake, trying to keep that, forget about that and move on, right? So, and that kind of resonated with me. And then what Wendy said was in terms of preparation, she said, she gave me a note, and that was that my recovery was very good, right? The recovery, whenever I got nervous or whenever I, fucked up here or there, the recovery was instantaneous.
Well, that's your musicianship and your experience, I think. So
that to a certain degree, but I also think that the way I used to prepare for the show, where I played through the show, through the entire show, I ended up practicing recovery. I didn't necessarily practice learning the show, learning the songs, but I practiced my recovery without knowing it. Right? So it was an incredible learning experience for me. I'm not kidding. It was the hardest show that I ever had to deal with.
A lot of people said that.
That's interesting, and that
I have a story about that too. If you want to
go for it. Yeah.
I actually got hired on day 2.
Oh wow.
The day of the very first rehearsal at SIR. That night, Michael Keller calls me up and says, "Can you start Mamma Mia tomorrow morning?" And I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, we're making a bass change. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Benny and Bjorn from ABBA are coming in." This was on a Wednesday night. I went in on a Thursday morning. Benny and Bjorn were flying in from Sweden Saturday for the Sitzprobe. And I had to learn the show in 2 days because the other guy, they let go.
Right.
That was the kind of show it was. They were like, and the very first thing Michael said to me was, "Play the ink." And you know how it is with rhythm section guys. We don't always want to play the ink. We put in our little bit here and there. And I did over the years.
Yeah.
Fit in a couple of things. In fact, I think there was a couple of things that I played that they ended up writing in the other books that were on the tour. And so it became part of the, I like pop music. I like playing parts. I like coming up with parts, and it's like part of the song. So I had no problem with that.
Right. And I think that's I was going to go there, because the difficulty of the show was the exposed nature of the bass that comes with pop music, that comes with disco, right? Where everything is sitting on top of the bass. It was an incredible, and again, like, this is coming from someone just like yourself who really likes pop music, who likes vocal music, who likes dance music and all of that. I was wondering,
now, the show you're playing now ain't Too Proud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a tricky book, and those bass lines are integral and so important to those songs.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's nothing but bass for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
In reality, that's really all of my shows. All the shows that I've done have had difficult books, so to speak. Be it you have to play with a pick and really loud, and kind of you have to know how to use a pick. That alone is already. Say again.
Spring Awakening like that? Was that a pick show?
No, that was Memphis actually.
Oh, Memphis was a pick show?
Memphis was a pick show, like solid 90%.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a difficulty there. Spring Awakening was just the nature of it was difficult. They didn't write out the bass part. They now have done it, but at the time there was no bass book as such.
Wow. So you had like just a chord charts?
Exactly.
So they transcribed your parts eventually, and that became the book?
Eventually, yes. Yeah. Totally.
I hope you
say again?
You got credit.
No.
I heard the guys, well, I'm really sorry to hear that, because I heard the guys, maybe Rich Mercurio could correct me, but I heard the guys at Waitress came up with their parts. and they actually got credit.
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah. I subbed on that show as well.
Yeah.
At that point in time, this is now Spring Awakening was 2006 to 2009, right? So maybe I don't want to say it was it was the first show that featured sort of a built-in rock band, right, or a built-in artist's band, but it had that sort of vibe to it. I mean, these shows, shows like that have happened before in history, right? Be it Hair with Purdy and Wilbur Bascom, being in the band with for the composer of Hair, Galt McDermott. I think so.
Something like that.
Yeah. So it was certainly not the first time that this had happened, right? But it definitely there was very little precedence, right? So with Spring Awakening, the difficulty that my subs faced was that they were coming in and they were like, okay, I want to play the ink, but there's no ink.
Right.
You know?
I sitting in the pit just before I got Mamma Mia, I was sitting in the pit at Lion King, watching Tom Barney, and basically what he was playing was not on the paper.
Right.
And so I went home and started looking at it, and then I got Mamma Mia, so I never ended up learning it completely and playing it, which I was thankful for, because it would have been a lot of work to go in. And I don't know, did you ever play Lion King?
Oh yeah, that was my very first show. Yeah.
Okay,
Oh yeah, no, I learned the show pretty much by ear. By the time I played it for the first time, I had the show memorized.
Yeah, I bet.
And of course there were the orchestral parts of it where you play upright and you have to blend with the strings and all of that. Those you don't necessarily have to memorize, but you do it anyway.
Right.
And that was my blueprint for how to learn a show, how to sub on a show. So I took that procedure and put it on Mamma Mia. But with Mamma Mia, you had a whole different animal, right? And you had this, as Frank puts it, like this mountain of material, right? Where it doesn't let up, right? So.
And they wanted the ink.
And they wanted the ink. I could produce the ink. That was not a problem. It was my my procedure in learning the show that didn't work for this environment.
Yeah. I think Frank's tips were good. Because it was really a show of songs. Like you play a song and you stop. There wasn't a lot of underscore.
Right.
Very little of that. Right. And it was basically you play Dancing Queen and you stop. You play any of these songs and then you move on. It's like the time.
Right. So let me ask you this: coming back to the pop bass, idea, and to the disco bass idea, what is your take on the difficulty there, and why is it that these songs, or why is it that the weight is so strong, is mostly on the bass? Really, do you have a take on that?
Well, I think it goes back to the Motown sound. I think it goes back to Jamerson and then moving into the 60s, where the bass kind of became front and center compared to what it used to be in the early 60s and 50s.
Right.
It was lots of roots and fifths and supportive. And then the bass lines became more part of the song. They're riff oriented, whether it's Led Zeppelin and Cream, or whether it's the Beatles or Carol Kay with the Beach Boys. And they became almost like sub hooks.
Right.
And I think that Benny and Bjorn, the songwriters in ABBA, they came out of that that time period. That was their influence. That was their big influence.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That totally, I mean, of course, I had thought of, I always credit Jamerson as being sort of the granddaddy of all of us, and without whom we wouldn't have our understanding of pop music, we wouldn't have any of this, right? And yet I never made the connection between him and disco.
Yeah. But then you look at even like Bernard Edwards, who was a really great bass player who played a lot of disco with Chic but came up with some really great hooks and the bass was cranked in the mix, and
Yeah.
the mix was a big part of the things too.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to go to school and grow up and playing with Dave Weckl.
Right.
He was a really big influence on me, and we would go to gigs together. We would record all the gigs and listen to them on the way home, and he would always say, "Listen to the mix, listen to where the bass is, listen where the drums are,"
Mm.
and that was a really important lesson to learn back then.
Yeah.
Early '80s.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. That's gold. That's gold right there. I mean, there's no doubt. You know, having said that, that actually brings me to another point, and you're the one who I always credit for introducing me to the in-ears.
Ah,
You know, what was your process getting to those? Because that also helped me a lot subbing on your show. That was another piece of the puzzle.
absolute game changer.
Yeah.
And I use some JH audio now, and
Mhm.
the investment in that quality of in-ears is just great. I mean, they come with me everywhere, whether I have a recording session or I'm playing in a pit,
Right.
or even sometimes on live gigs, just to get the clarity. You know, most of the shows, they'll give you those over the ear foam,
Yeah.
have the foam over your ears, and they leak and they don't really sound good. So you really want the isolation.
Right.
And so I started out with some, I think my first pair was a pair of Adamatics, and they were okay,
Okay.
but they had these flange tips, rubber tips that sometimes would get stuck in my ear when I pull them out. I had to get some tweezers then to pull the fingers out. And they sounded decent, but I was always in search of better sound.
Right.
And I think I was like that with all the amps I've owned over the years,
Mm.
and studio gear that I've owned. And I just, with technology, I think things always get better. And so I was
Mm.
always a fan of that and always searched out those things. So yeah, I moved from the Edomatics to these Sonys. I think
Mm.
they were decent. They were decent,
Okay.
especially for the price. And then finally the GH Audio. And
Mm.
talking to other players, and um, it really makes a big difference because
Yeah.
you can hear comfortably, and you can play at a level. I just told my wife the other day, I think Broadway helped save my ears. I mean, I still have great hearing. I don't have any hearing loss, and I think playing Broadway for over 20 years, I think listening at a reasonable level,
Yeah.
um, compared to all the other live gigs I could have done. I
Right.
subbed out when I could. That's where I got you guys in, but playing all those shows in the pit at a comfortable level, and that was really important to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. No, at the time, I remember you had the Shure E5s,
Right.
and I still have the first pair that I ever got. This
I
I
do.
still, you know, this they don't quit on you.
No, I replaced the cable, but it's great. They detach, and it's a really easy replacement and repair to make. And I still use them when I travel on an airplane, when I want to
Yeah.
listen, or on a train. They're great to have around too.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And for
sure.
the money, they're really good.
Yeah, for sure. No, this I never looked back. I had exactly the same experience that you just described. This you start using them, you never look back. It becomes second nature.
Totally. And back then too, it's different now with pits. But we had amps in the pits back then. And
Right.
we had and at Mamma Mia, we had the live drums were in the pit, even though they were behind a plexiglass booth.
Right.
Between the amps and the drums, there was so much leakage, and then there was an open pit, and we heard the house. So to really get that isolation, I really had to go the molded in-ear
Right.
route, and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
My last show, Kinky Boots, um, totally different thing. It was all direct. There were no amps in the pit.
Oh wow. Oh wow. Yeah. No, that's a whole, because now you're getting into sound modeling. You're getting into taking the so-called analog element out of it, you know, and just dealing with it on a digital realm or in a digital realm.
Yep.
Did you let me ask you this, did you use particular preamps or anything like that, or a particular DI?
I tried a couple. I tried a couple things over the years. The sound guys at Mamma Mia, going back to that first, I think they just had a countryman, and that was fine. I thought that worked out well. Then at I went and did this off-Broadway show for a year after Mamma Mia closed. It was called Trip of Love. And I was able to bring in, I'm reaching over to get this piece of gear here.
Yeah.
I brought in a Glockenklang preamp, and that was really great. I was really happy to bring that in.
Wow.
And I brought in we had amps in the pit there. It was kind of like a 60s, 70s rock show. I mean, we did everything from Steppenwolf and Jefferson Airplane to The Girl from Ipanema. It was
nice.
It was a lot of fun to play. Lately, I've been using this Noble DI.
Okay, I heard of it. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's got a couple tubes in it, and it's active, so it has a bass and treble. It also has a low end roll off. I leave it flat, but having this just before your ears is great because you can adjust the EQ that you're hearing. So I'll bring it on some live gigs too. And then I let the house take the DI from the amp or their own DI, but then I take my in-ears from the Noble.
Oh, wow.
And I'm able to tweak the EQ a little bit, which you're not always able to do.
Right.
I highly recommend the Noble.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of people I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I do see a lot of posts on social media about, people using it and it's just delivering every time.
It does. Yeah. Really happy with it. And I've had it for 3 or 4 years now.
Wow.
I know the company's kind of taken off. I think there's probably a 6-month wait to get them at this point.
Incredible. Well, that's pretty cool. That's, that definitely takes it to another level in terms of using tubes where I go the route of transistors. Like I use an Avalon U5.
That's a great pre.
That's just super clear and just does exactly what I needed to do. But taking it to the going a step further and using tubes is a really good idea. So I'm gonna have to look into that.
I always thought there was a connection too between passive basses and active basses, and using a tube preamp amp versus a strictly solid state amp.
Right.
I always felt that the passive basses sound better with the tube preamps. The active basses sound better with strictly solid state all across the board.
Okay.
If it's an impedance thing but to my ears, that always made a difference to me.
That's so cool. Well, that is an incredible insight. That's definitely a lot to experiment with.
See if you find.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Also, I should mention that Paul Adamy is one of the few bass players here in town who also uses a Painter bass.
That's right. I love mine.
Same here.
Mamma Mia. Actually, I got my first 5-string bass. I have a Sadowski 5 vintage PJ. I still have it. I love the bass. But I got that bass to sub for Francesco Centeno on Saturday Night Fever. And here's a show, right? That 5 strings didn't exist when that music came out, but of course they had to write it for a 5-string bass. So never owned a 5 up to that point. So I thought, well, if I'm going to sub for Frankie, I gotta get a 5-string.
Right.
And then that served me well because Mamma Mia was a 5-string gig and some of the other things. So I'm really glad it forced me to get and learn and get comfortable with the 5-string. But then after about a year and a half at Mamma Mia, I ended up breaking my ring finger.
No.
My left hand.
That's terrible.
It's terrible. I was out for 6 weeks. I was so bummed. Had I just relaxed and say this show's going to run 14 years, I would have enjoyed my 6 weeks a little bit more. Like, oh shit, I don't want to miss 6 weeks, But then on top of that, these are kind of like buddy fingers. So the orthopedist, he ended up putting these two together
Right.
while it healed. And it caused my pinky to weaken tremendously. And it took literally like over 5 years to get full strength back. After not using it for 6 weeks, and you know, on the bass,
Yeah.
in octaves, the pinky, I used more than my ring finger.
Right.
Pretty much. So coming off of that injury, I thought, I'm going to get myself another 4-string bass. And that's when I found the Pensa.
Oh.
I wanted, it was on some of the other gigs I was playing outside of the Mamma Mia pit. I would try to bring the 4-string, and it was a little bit easier on the hands during my recovery.
Right. No, that makes.
With the Pensa.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And then you ended up, and this was very unusual as well. You ended up using an F bass on Mamma Mia.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had the Sadowski vintage PJ, and that was on my only 5-string at the time. I started Mamma Mia, and I thought, well, if this show's going to run, I want to leave a bass in the pit,
right?
You know, and I want to get a second 5-string. So I thought, well, let me, you know, it's hindsight, it's kind of funny, but I actually said back then, oh, let me see if this show's going to run. You know, if it looks like it's got some legs and it's going to last, I'll get a second 5-string bass. So I started with the Sadowski in there, and then it was pretty evident pretty quickly that this was a big hit. It was going to run for a while. So Jimmy, I can't think of his last name.
Coppola?
I mean, Jimmy, if you're thinking about this, but Capello.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jimmy. He had a great shop on 9th Avenue at the time.
Correct. Jimmy's Bass and Guitar Boutique.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So I stopped in there, and I stopped in 48th Street and all over. I was looking for another 5-string, but when I went into Jimmy's, he had this F bass hanging on the wall, and I didn't really know much about it. And so, but I checked it out. I just loved the neck right away. I loved the whole feel of it, the sound, and I said to Jimmy, I said, look, can I just bring this over and play a couple shows at Mamma Mia, make sure the sound guys are cool with it, the conductor's cool, and he said, yeah, bring it over there. And he was the sweetest guy, and he let me demo the bass in the pit. Everybody loved it, and so that became the Mamma Mia bass.
Yeah, and that was.
And took the Sadowski home.
Yeah, and that kind of added to the whole mystery to it, and part of me, I mean, you see my basses here in the background. You see hopefully you see the upright right there. You know, like I like having a lot of basses, and I like playing a lot of basses, right? It totally added to the mystery. It was so thrilling, right, to go there.
Bass?
Say again?
The first F bass you played?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never played an F bass before. Never played a kubiki before.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
that was pretty rare, the kubiki.
Yeah.
It was my only fretless too, so that one had to go. I thought about getting another one over the years, but it just seemed to work. But I know that threw a lot of people off too. The kubiki, and then with the low D extension, and remembering to switch it back and forth.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I was totally into that.
Good.
that was. Go ahead.
I bought that bass. I bought that kubiki. It's a serial number 102.
Get out.
I bought that. So it's one of the early ones. I brought my Fender 65 Fender jazz bass into Roger Sadowski's old shop down in Chelsea, probably back in 1985, to get some fretwork done. And Roger had the kubiki hanging on his wall. He wasn't really making basses then. He was just a repair guy, and he was also known for his preamps, you know, with Marcus Miller and Will Lee clients. But I went in there when I saw that kubiki Factor on the wall. I was like, what the hell is that? Because they're so like futuristic looking. And I think the guy from Duran Duran also played one. I think he might have been one of the only other guys I saw.
John Taylor, yeah.
Right. That's right. So I was like, this is a cool bass. So I tried it, and that's where I got that from. I ended up pulling the frets out later because I got a second one.
Right.
And that's why that one became a fretless.
Yeah. No, that was such a cool. I mean, between the kubiki and the F bass, it was, you know, everything was just. I was in heaven. Like everything was like, oh, this is great. And then I go in and totally mess up, you know, in my mind. So it was. That's why, you know, that's where I was coming from. Like, I'm the lowest of the low.
Well, that's another thing that you bring up with subbing, that I think it didn't always used to be this way, but now you're expected to play the instruments of the player, whoever has the chair.
Yeah,
You basically have to play their instruments.
yeah,
And it's not always what your comfort level is, whether it's set up the way you like it set up, the gauge strings. I was subbing on the Cher show. That was my daughter's show, the Cher show.
mm,
Went on tour with Ben Platt, and I got to cover her leave of absence, and the upright bass that she had there had the heaviest gauge strings.
mm,
I don't play upright as nearly as much as I play electric. So on my upright here, I have some lighter gauge strings, but she had the heaviest gauge strings on there.
mm.
And it was really hard to play, but it's one of the things that you got to just put up with and do.
Right.
When you're subbing, you have to learn to get comfortable with the instruments that are there.
Yeah, yeah.
I think over the years, I had one sub at Mamma Mia who did talk the conductor into allowing him to bring his own bass,
Okay.
his own.
Okay.
The sound guys aren't as happy, even though levels were always something that the conductors and even the sound guys would bring up, because some guys dig in more. And
Right.
so instead of turning yourself down in the house, or if you're on, your own cue mix, you can just turn the bass down. And they didn't want to hear that. They wanted all the volumes to be the same.
Yes.
It's not going to happen. It's like when the drum subs came in, you'd have one guy. I always find way guys mix themselves, whether the hi-hat
Yeah.
louder or softer compared to all the other drums, the
Yeah.
kick louder or softer. So the way people mix themselves by how hard they play each of their limbs really affects the sound and the groove.
Right.
That's harder to fine tune in your mix, because you can't go in. We didn't have a hi-hat or a kick drum or a snare drum channel on our mixers. We had an overall global stereo drum mix. So
Yeah, no, that makes, totally. That's what you heard. That's totally what you heard. And to be quite honest, today with the Aviom system, I'm almost not quite happy with making my own drum mix. Like, I want to hear the whole thing, and I don't necessarily want to.
So at Too Proud, you have an individual faders?
I mean, it's been over a year since I've been there, so I forgot.
Right. I'll come back soon, right?
Yeah, it will for sure. No, but I think that we have bass drum, we have snare, hi-hat,
wow,
and then perhaps overhead.
Right. Okay.
So you do have to sort of make your. Say again.
A lot of control. That's a lot of control that you have.
Exactly. Exactly.
You want, but
yeah. No, that's with a lot of control also comes a lot of possibility for distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
I'm very often, I would rather not be distracted and just have a good mix. Yep. Rely on someone putting that mix together and just sending it to me as a whole, right? Everybody hears differently. Everybody has a different setup.
Right, and when Clayton's drum subs come in, they're going to play differently too.
Yeah, of course.
So it might be nice to tweak it from time to time, but you're right. You got enough to do with just playing the book.
Yeah, no, I'm the only one who plays without a break.
Right.
I start at the beginning of the act and I finish at the end of the act.
That's
and
right.
There's a 15-minute break and then you start over again. Very much like Mamma Mia, really, but
Yeah. The second act, especially at Mamma Mia, was really great. It just flew by, just one tune right into the next. And I kind of prefer that. I mean, I had some breaks early on in the first act, but then you get the second act and it just goes one tune after the other. And I think it makes the time go faster instead of just sitting around.
I mean, I would agree with you there. I totally think so as well. Where with Ain't Too Proud, where it gets a little dicey is especially then the last 20 minutes, because then there are moments where it's just bass, and you have to play this groove. The song escapes me right now, but you have to play this groove by yourself for 20 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's nothing. There's maybe a kick. There's probably a kick, and there's maybe a hi-hat on the 2 and 4, and then even he's
Wow.
He's like, oh, I'm out.
I don't know. A click at least at that during the 20 minutes? Is
Yeah,
there?
yeah. So it's you and the kick and
Wow.
1,500 people in the audience.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it is exposed. It is exposed. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, that is the job.
Yep.
What this particular show is concerned.
Yep. And I was happy for that after to play that show for 14 years.
Yeah,
And knowing how much fun that those bass parts are really well played.
yeah,
And having that part to play really made it interesting. And whether there's a different drummer coming in or guitar player changes things up, it was really, whether it was year 8 or year 14, it felt the same.
yeah. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And that's also, I mean, that's also testament to you and to the rest of the pit for making it feel, comfortable, for keeping sort of the spirit of that whole thing going. And with the kind of music, how could you not? It's sort of inherent in the music a little bit.
We didn't phone it in. We really came there every day,
Yeah.
ready to play. And as my good friend Warren Oates, I'm sure you know Warren.
Oh yeah.
It's like the recording session that never ends. So
Exactly.
You just have to do another take, but it's a new day. And it was always great to have subs in because it would make things feel differently. You'd feel like you'd be energized.
Yeah.
You could come back too when you took off and have the energy and the focus and the excitement to just do it again.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, listen, Paul Adamy, thank you so much again for making yourself available today. This has been great. It's I kind of went somewhere else where I thought this I was gonna get like all the inside stuff, and what I got was, well, you did great. Which I didn't expect.
You've been off your show for a year, and you can remember what the exact mix was. But so when we're talking about over 10 years ago now, when you were at Mamma Mia, it's really hard to remember.
Of course,
really more specifics. But I do know that Wendy and David, when they didn't like somebody, then they were out. Some people just knew that they weren't up for it, and they took themselves out of it too. I had a couple guys like that too, but then they also fired some folks, which I'm sorry to see, but those things happen, and for what reason they felt the pressure. I know in Act 2 we had that exposed fretless line. It was just a downbeat. There wasn't even a click count off.
Yeah,
it was name of the game. There was no.
And you had to switch the bass.
You had to switch the bass fast, so it was a fast changeover.
Yeah.
There was no click count off. You had to get the tempo right from the jump. It was a swing 16th note feel bass line, and it was just you and the vocalist on the stage.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of pressure for a lot of people, and I think that's probably what did the guy who lasted one rehearsal. I think that's probably what did him in. Just that feel and getting that just from the get-go. Coming in somebody else's fretless, which is even trickier.
Yeah, it's never easy. It's just never easy. Yeah.
So given all those circumstances, with no click, jumping right in with the tempo on a fretless after a quick changeover, it was a hot seat.
And I remember that particular moment. You had because you also had to engage at least 2 effect pedals.
That's right.
And you came up with this really genius way of doing 2 pedals at the same time, but just putting them next to each other.
Right. Oh. That's right. And I also tried to color code the charts too, so that there was to switch from the 5-string to the fretless. I used a Boss pedal switcher, and it had a red light and a green light, and the green light was for the 5-string, and the red light was for the fretless.
Yeah.
And I would put a little sticker in the chart just to make sure that you knew that when you played the fretless, the red light needed to be on.
Yeah.
And I know I heard this from Jeff Campbell, but I think it came from John Benthal or maybe even John Harrington, where you don't want to make things so complicated.
Right.
that when your subs come in, you have all these pedal switches and you got a new sound for every song, and you got, you're reaching down, or there's two different chorus pedals because you want different sounds for. Don't make it too complicated.
Right, right.
I know Guitar One at Mamma Mia. He made some things pretty complicated for his guys, and they had to switch some sounds.
Mm.
I think they were using some modeler back then that
Right.
was in the early 2000s. But yeah, you don't want to make things too complicated, and you really want to help your subs out at that point too. But
yeah, of course.
It was nice to be able to actually switch basses and turn on the chorus by putting those two pedals next to each other.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. That was so smart. I would have never thought of it, but I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
And you explained it also the same way. You explained it like, here's what you need to do. You just put your foot in the middle, and you just hit the two stomp boxes at the same time. Everything will take care of itself. It almost felt like you were getting away with something. That's
Did you practice that at home by putting two pedals together?
No. Okay. No. That I didn't do. I did. I think what I had was I had set myself up. I had set myself up so I could do the switch, the physical switch, with taking one bass off and putting the other one on.
Knowing how much time you'd have. And
exactly. So that I had set myself up with, and I sort of mimicked your setup in the pit. I don't remember right now whether you had the basses on the left or on the right side, but I put it in the same position.
Yep.
Just to be able to quickly move from one to the next. Right?
Yep.
Because that was more, for whatever reason, that was more intimidating to me than the pedals. The pedals, since you explained them to me, with one movement, I could turn one off and the other one on at the same time. Perfect. Like that's all I needed to know, right? But the physical act of taking one bass off, and I don't remember, did you play with a strap or without a strap?
I played without a strap. Just
without a strap, okay.
We sat, and it was easier to make the switch then.
Exactly.
But obviously, that was the other reason I liked the F bass too. I felt comfortable on my knee without a strap.
Yeah, it was very, very, very well balanced. Yeah, no doubt. So I had to get into all of that. Just the physicality of putting one bass down and picking another one up. And I am not, sorry, say it again.
Choreography. It's whether it's the pedals or the switching. Yeah. A lot of people practice that at home too.
Oh yeah. And it would behoove them, and it definitely, worked in my favor as well to practice that, because, it is that, not only is it a recording session, as Warren Oates would say, but it's a one take only recording session.
Right.
You only have one chance.
Right.
You don't get in there to fix something or whatever. No, it's one take, first take only.
Yeah. Yep. And you're moving on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, the physicality of moving the instruments around was something that I had to practice.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. Yep. So, well, listen, anyway, all of this is great stuff. Paul Adamy, again, thank you so much for making yourself available today. I'm so grateful to you. I'm grateful for having been one of your subs and seeing you here today. Make sure that you stay safe. It looks like we're coming out on the other end of this. So,
yep.
Yeah.
George, it's great to catch up. Really great to see you, and thank you for asking me.
Oh, of course. Thank you. All right. Take care.
Right.
Later.